Seated across from me right now is a man who is a pianist, and he is also a member of the executive board of the Americans for a Safe Israel. His name is David Bar-Ilan, and he was to have been joined by another David Lilienthal. David Lilienthal, who edits and publishes Middle East Perspective. David Lilienthal, who is a spokesman for the Arab cause, even though he himself is not Arab, rejected the invitation to appear and felt that, Mr. Bar-Ilan felt that it was demeaning for me to have him debate a pianist. Now, I have great respect for pianists. I didn't know there was any demeaning feature to being on a program debating with a pianist. But
he was probably a little afraid of debating a pianist, especially a knowledgeable pianist or somebody who knows anything about the facts, because Mr. Lilienthal is quite famous and quite notorious for inventing the sort of nonsense that even Goebbels would have been ashamed of. He even went around, as a matter of fact, very recently, saying that the diary of Anna Frank was a forgery and that the Holocaust never occurred. I mean, it's that kind of thing that...
Is Israel more safe now than it was?
Yes, more than ever before. That doesn't mean it is completely safe, but it's certainly much safer than it has ever been. And that is partly because of the campaign in Lebanon. And I say partly only because the campaign also has a lot of implications and ramifications, aside from the fact that the Syrian threat, the immediate Syrian threat, was removed and the threat of the PLO was removed. I don't know if you realize what the threat of the PLO was. You see, Israeli intelligence is supposed to be really quite good. It's one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
It has, as you know, a way of inspecting what's happening in Lebanon by constant flyovers, by drones and by planes. And when Israeli intelligence expects to find something and then realizes that what it expected is really only 1/10 of what it actually found, it means that the danger was even much greater than Israel had expected. I don't know if you realize, for instance, that the number of weapons that have been found, and that is not the end of it, because every single day that passes brings about the finding of more weapons in more places, in more tunnels that are so fortified and so hidden that even the Israeli Air Force and its very good intelligence system had not discovered. There is enough there are enough light weapons in Lebanon that have been found to equip an army of 1 million people. I repeat, 1 million people. Now, obviously, that wasn't intended for the PLO, because the PLO, at this point, with all the prisoners and with all the casualties and with all the people that are still in West Beirut, do not count more than 12,000 people. So, obviously, an army of 1 million people was intended to use those 1 million weapons. More than 1 million weapons. I hate to tell you, too, that they're not all Russians, that many of them are M16s. I saw them 2 days ago in Israel myself. I just arrived from there yesterday. The fact is that these weapons exist, and I must say that even Israeli intelligence, as far as I know, is quite flabbergasted, not only by the finding of the weapons, but by the intention for which they were stored there and prepositioned there. And that in itself is really quite an extraordinary phenomenon, that the Russians and the PLO had stored the kind of weapons there that were obviously intended for a very major offensive, and obviously not just an offensive against Israel, but against the whole structure of the Middle East defense, and in general, in particular, the Persian Gulf.
Are you enlarging on something here?
I'm not saying that I know exactly what the weapons were for, nor do I say that I know exactly why there were, for instance, fantastic caches of rubles, of Russian cash. Nobody understands what they're there for. And I suppose that after evaluation and analysis, the Israeli intelligence would find out what they're there for. Obviously, they're not there for the use of the PLO. As I said before, there's no hope, no chance that the PLO would have been able to recruit 1 million people.
Let's pause for just...
tunnels that are so fortified that with the newest weapons, with the newest rockets and with the newest bombs that are available at the Israeli airports, it was impossible to even scratch them. They were built with fortified cement, by the way, by slave labor from the Orient. You'd be amazed to hear they're all Koreans and South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese who were working there, and not Arabs nor Russians. They were digging those tunnels, and they fortified them to such an extent. All that Israeli Air Force could discover were that some of these tunnels could allow 2 trucks at a time to enter them and to exit from them. They tried to bomb some of them. They didn't succeed. The fact is that, as I said before, the estimate was 1/10, if not less, of the number of tunnels that were actually found. Those tunnels are so full of arms that it boggles the imagination. 100 to 150 trucks a day take these arms into Israel today. It will take at least 2 to 3 months to finish the job of those tunnels that have already been found. And as I said before, not a day passes without a new tunnel and a new bunker being found full of these weapons. It boggles the mind. As somebody said, there were more light weapons in these tunnels than Germany had at the end of the Second World War. We're talking about a rather larger country. Now, the fact is that this is all very close to the borders of Israel. And the fact that you don't know about it, that MCA didn't have anything about it, is no exception at all. The media in general don't report these things. And that is perhaps the subject that I would like to enlarge on here, because I don't understand why the media are giving such a distorted view of what's happening in Lebanon, what is happening on the, what provoked the attack in the first place, how the war has progressed, and what is the fate of both the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and the PLO during this war. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe we can go into that a little later. But the point is, if somebody had told you that 20 million citizens of New York City were left roofless, without homes, you would wonder about the number, wouldn't you, since you know the number of the citizens of, or the residents of the city of New York. You say 20 million, that sounds a little exaggerated, doesn't it? When the PLO announced that 600,000 people in southern Lebanon were left homeless as a result of the Israeli invasion, nobody doubted it and reported it. And it was not only reported in the press repeatedly for 3 or 4 weeks, it was even picked up in advertisements by people who were pro-PLO or pro-Arab, and cited as the correct number for that. And of course, the whole area doesn't hold a population of 500,000. So obviously, if there if the reporters did any investigating of that kind of a charge, they would have realized it was quite impossible that 600,000 remained homeless in a country that doesn't have 500,000 population. When the Arabs in general make claims, isn't it true that after 35 years in which their fabrications have been absolutely outrageous, the reporters should at least treat them with some kind of care, with some kind of doubt, with some kind of skepticism, and try to find out if they were indeed true? The Arabs, after 3 days of the invasion, announced that 10,000 civilians, Arabs, 10,000 Palestinians and Lebanese were killed in the first 3 days. That was repeated by Brzezinski on television on the 4th or the 5th day, in which he actually eliminated the word civilians. He eliminated the Palestinians and the Lebanese. He just said 10,000 women and children. These figures usually snowball, and people become accustomed to them and believe that they actually existed. Well, the fact of the matter is that less than 500 civilians were killed in the whole war. I don't think there's been a war in the history of mankind in which such meticulous, scrupulous care was taken by an invading army which, by the way, was defending its own country and therefore invaded. Never has such a scrupulous care been taken not to touch civilians. Of the 300 Israeli casualties dead in this invasion, at least 100 were killed only because such care was taken, because the Israelis were so careful not to attack civilians.
How could they be?
You attack an area, as you know, the PLO always puts their anti-aircraft guns, the caches of ammunition and weapons, their main positions in schools, hospitals, and in public buildings, and of course in apartment buildings. The amount of weapons that was found in public buildings and in private homes is absolutely staggering. When you attack such a thing, when the fire comes from such an area, you have two choices. You either attack with infantry, or you ask the artillery and the Air Force to soften it up, as the military term goes. The Israelis avoided asking the artillery to soften up such areas because of the fact that there were civilians in them. They actually went on with the infantry, and of course that always costs more because it costs more lives. I'll give you some more examples.
Before you...
In West Beirut, the PLO has fortified itself, of course, since it is in the middle of the city, in apartment buildings. And it's very easy for the television reporters to show pictures of apartment buildings being destroyed. The fact is that those apartment buildings are the headquarters of the PLO or their positions, their military positions. And, of course, they have to be shelled and bombarded from the sea and bombed from the air. There's usually a very good reason for any one of those apartment buildings being bombed. Sometimes, of course, it is inevitable that neighboring apartment buildings are hit as well. It's impossible to prevent it as long as the PLO is cowardly enough to fortify itself within the civilian population. And that has been its policy ever since it has existed in Lebanon and before that in Jordan. That's the way it is. But I'll give you a couple of other examples. The PLO actually put babies, infants, on the road in order to stop Israeli tanks. obviously knowing that the Israeli tanks would never go over babies and infants on the road. As a result, Israeli soldiers jumped out of the tanks and got mowed down by the ambush that was laid for them by the...
Can you prove this?
I wasn't there when it happened. I can prove it by saying that I talked to the injured soldiers from that battle who told me about their comrades being killed that way. Unfortunately, the Israelis are awfully bad at public relations. I've often said that if the Israelis were as good in their military operations as they are in their public relations, Israel would be in the sea long ago. The point is that as good as they are in the military operations, so they are bad in the public relations.
Why would that be? A lot of people, yours truly included, could appreciate going across the border. A lot of people could appreciate taking out artillery sites. A lot of people could understand that. But why go beyond the 25 miles that the Israeli government said they were going to?
No. You see, that's a misunderstanding. People don't really read these things very carefully. The Israeli government said that they wanted to create a zone of 25 miles in which the artillery of the PLO would not exist. It didn't say that they wanted to go 25 miles. Those are two different things. In order to create that zone, you might have to go further. Don't forget, 4 years ago, that zone, it's exactly what the Israeli government did 4 years ago, and it was a total disaster. They went almost 25 miles. They went up to the Litani River. They cleared the PLO from there. The PLO ran away. The Israelis went back to Israel, except for a cordon sanitaire, a small little strip that was given to Haddad, and the PLO promptly came back and started shelling again. It's impossible to secure a 25-mile zone if you stick to the 25 miles, if you go just the 25 miles, because then if you don't destroy the head of the snake, it will return.
What if their equipment was Russian? Where'd they get the M16s?
The M16s arrived from Libya. Where Libya got it, I don't know, but I imagine that nowadays, as one says, money has no smell, and I think that on the open arms market, it's possible to get M16s without too much trouble. I don't think the ones that I saw were the ones that Saudi Arabia sent to the PLO, but there's no question about Saudi Arabia sending to the PLO a lot of American arms, which is against the agreement, of course, that America has with the Saudis about selling them arms. It is documented as well as seen. That is, it is not just the fact of American arms in the hands of the PLO, but also the documents that prove that they arrived from Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, one of the jokes about it originated with Abba Eban, the former foreign minister of Israel, who said Syria has MiGs with a single engine, a single pilot, and a single flight, which is exactly what happened to them. The point is that this is also the first war in which Israel used a lot of its homemade inventions, including the Merkava tank, which proved to be more than a match for the latest Soviet tank, the M72. And which is in itself a very important fact. A lot of the electronic equipment was Israeli-made, and that is what made possible, how exactly I don't know, but that is what made possible the destruction of the SAMs. The drones that made possible not only the reconnaissance over Lebanon, but also the destruction of those very same SAMs, were also Israeli-made. The shell that penetrated the Russian armor, which wasn't supposed to be penetrable, was made in Israel. As a matter of fact, it just was mentioned as the recipient, the factory was mentioned as the recipient of Israel's highest prize for this sort of thing because of its efficiency. So Israel is quite proud of its ability to do this sort of thing, and I think America should be also very proud of the superiority of American arms in such a confrontation, which is exactly why America is the only country in the world today which is able to decide what goes on in the Middle East. As the White House said just today, Russia has nothing to say about the Middle East, and that happened in spite of the fact, or because of the fact, I should say, that America has sided with Israel rather than inhibited Israel from going on with its attack on the PLO, and I hope that America continues to do so, because it should be clear to the United States that only at a time of strength and a time of staunch support for its ally does it have the kind of clout that it wants in the Middle East, and not at time of appeasement and a time of pacification of the Arabs who whose hunger knows no bounds. The greatest American prestige in the Middle East was enjoyed right after the 67 war, when the victory of Israel over its enemies was unequivocal. And the same kind of prestige is being enjoyed today again, because Israel has proven that it is stronger than its enemies. The only time that America had a tough time in the Middle East was right after 73, when Kissinger managed to change what was a great victory into a psychological defeat, and therefore got America into the oil mess, into the prestige mess, and into the unfriendly mess that it encountered in the Middle East.
Somehow or other, ever since the Korean War, here in the United States, I'm talking domestically now, there is a considerable body of intellectual thought which wields a tremendous amount of power and influence in this country. That so-called intellectual thought has it that there's something indecent, something not correct about, number one, having that power, and number two, having the will to use that power. I think it has translated into feelings about Israel. Now, make no mistake, I have...
There's some intimidation so much. I think that every decent person is against war. I think every decent person is against power. And that's not an American phenomenon. During the 30s, most of Britain was against using power, against arming, against doing anything against violence, because they felt that violence was dirty, was wrong, was inhuman. And they're absolutely correct. It is correct. Unfortunately, not the whole world feels this way. There are always dictatorships. There are always totalitarian countries, whether they are Soviet or Arab, who don't feel this way. And if they don't feel this way, and you do feel this way, and you don't arm, and if you don't resist, and if you don't use your power, they're going to subjugate you, just the way Hitler did to all of Europe, just the way the Soviet Union has done in all of Eastern Europe and in Afghanistan and in other places in Africa, and just the way the Arabs would have done in Israel if they had the power to do so. It is extremely unfortunate. I'm against war. I hate killing. Nobody hates killing more than Jews. Nobody hates killing more than Israel. And the fact of the matter is that if we had sat on our hands and hadn't done anything about it, we would have all been dead. And that's exactly the danger in America, that those are very well-meaning people. I don't think that most are, except for a few agents of the KGB and a few communists, I think most of them are very well-meaning people who think war is terrible. It is terrible. Hatred is terrible. It is terrible. Violence is terrible. It is terrible. But the point is, there are totalitarian countries in the world that use nothing but force, in which public opinion plays absolutely no role. You know what happened to the 15 dissidents in the Soviet Union who tried to talk about nuclear arms? They are all in jail. It's impossible to expect any kind of other attitude from totalitarian countries, as I said, whether they're Arab countries or Soviet countries. And therefore, one has to arm, one has to rely on power, one has to be realistic about it instead of living in a kind of euphoric never land. What do you think he told them?
The Brezhnev pieces, but one was about that huge tunnel that they found. It was on one of the networks. I don't remember which one because I watched all three of them. And the reporter said it was as big as 3 football fields. Now that is big.
Yes.
And the other part I saw was a schoolhouse that was abandoned, and the hole was ripped in the floor of the school where the desks would be. And in the basement, there were all boxes and rockets and stuff that were just stacked up there. Now, it's possible, Bob, that when they got 25 or 30 kilometers in and they captured some people, they found that maybe there was more of these extensive caches of arms further up, and it was possible maybe they wanted to really clean it out, and that might be one of the reasons why they wanted to go a little further up.
Honey.
Yes, Kenny?
Yeah, and you got like this here, I think in Channel 5. They found these arms, and estimated about 300,000 arms were laying there, tunnels and cellars. And according to the theories, 2 theories, either the Russians would send in their Central Asian volunteers, Muslims would be sent in, or the Iranians, to show the Iranian lining up, or the Iranians would send in 300,000 men to fight against the Zionists.
Thank you, Kenny. What about Iran? The whole place is very volatile. The one thing that I wanted to say about the Iran-Iraq war, though, is that it is an additional proof that the source of the trouble in the Middle East has absolutely nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict, because obviously Iran and Iraq are not fighting over the Palestinians or about the existence of Israel. They're fighting because they want each other's territory. The friction in the Middle East is so great that there's absolutely no way to eliminate it by either solving or not solving the so-called Palestinian problem. So,
I must tell you that I had occasion to be in Lower Manhattan this morning. I had some business to attend to in a building located at 125 Broad Street, and therefore I had to use, you should pardon the expression, the subway, getting on at the South Ferry subway station. And it is absolutely appalling. It's absolutely a disgrace. It is shocking. It is tragic. It is inexcusable what has happened to this once vaunted subway system. I cannot believe that in a relatively few short years, these creatures with spray paint and magic marker have so completely won a total, complete, massive victory over the city of New York. But they won. These hooligans with the spray paint and the markers have won. They won. They own the subways. There's hardly 1 square inch. Hardly 1 square inch of surface, either on the outside or the inside of the trains, unmarked by their grotesque, primitive, Neanderthal scribbling. Civilization lost. It's dehumanizing. My heart goes out to those people who have to ride those trains every day. By the way, I was told that I was on the worst. The creme de la creme. I was on the number 1 IRT. West Side. The worst. Incredible thing about these creatures who use these spray paint cans and magic markers is that they are obviously able to shoplift all of their tools, and they must be taking these spray paint cans and pens in great numbers. They do it with impunity. They perform their acts with impunity. How many are there? 50, 60, 100? I've talked to transit authority officials who say at the very most 200. 200 people at the very most. And they completely defaced the entire subway system. They own it. Isn't that incredible? Some gentleman who was riding with me who uses the train regularly says, I try not to notice it. I try to bury my head in a book or in a newspaper, he said, but I can't. There is a depth that this dehumanizing effect reaches, which I'm sure would even surprise and even gratify those creatures who commit these acts. And we go back to my observation earlier that we deal with issues on 2 levels. An unspoken level, unspoken for the most part, except perhaps in the most intimate of conversations, in which we know what should be done, but then the public pronouncements, because we don't want to sound unkind. We don't want to sound like stormtroopers. We don't want to sound like fascists and all of that. And so we don't really say what should be done. These creatures are known, and they should be rounded up, and they should be made to spend the rest of their days cleaning up the abomination they have created. And only until every last square inch has been cleaned, only until every last bit of the ugly spray paint they have so unelegantly given us is washed away, only then should they be released. Will it happen? Of course not.
There are so many really, really serious issues. I can't understand how we can allow ourselves to be distracted by autographs on the train or pictures on the sides.
If it were that simple that we had some autographs, and to call them autographs, of course, is totally misleading.
There's no germs involved. It's just ink.
No, it isn't just ink. What it is evidence that they can do anything they want, anytime they want, and they have taken over every square inch of territory inside and outside of the trains.
They're not hurting.
There was a time, you know, when it started...
The train people are by not fixing what's wrong, and it's terribly detrimental to our health.
You know, now and then, it was a terrible ride. I mean, it was just absolutely terrible all the way around. The whole experience is dehumanizing. And I think that anybody would agree that the thing you are completely surrounded with, from the moment you enter to the moment to long after you leave, is the ugly, tawdry, absolutely grotesque effect of the graffiti. I thank you for the...
Made that much money. 15 years ago, we didn't have these casinos. We didn't have the Meadowlands racetrack. We didn't have any lottery program in the state.
Right.
Now, where is all this money going? I mean, I just can't. I mean, this is an absorbent amount of money. Now, if we didn't have these things, where would all this money be coming from now?
I think you are raising a question that I'm appalled more people don't raise. What happens to this money, whether it be money from a lottery, but we won't go into any other case except the one that you outlined. And you're absolutely right. The casinos, the Meadowlands, are bringing in more money to the state of New Jersey than they had a few short years ago. Added to what you said, I point out that from Trenton, we are getting news every day that the new governor, Tom Kean, is looking for more ways to raise money. Now, the latest is a transit tax. Tax.
That's what's tricking me.
Right. This proves that President Reagan was absolutely right last year when he said there's no point in Congress appropriating more money because they'll find ways to spend it. And that's why he says the only way to try to get a handle on government is to reduce spending. I'm afraid the president was absolutely right when he said that. And what you're bringing up is a dramatic illustration that no matter how much money government gets its hands on, government will find some way to spend it. And most of the time, we don't even know where it went.
Yeah. It's really...
Life is never really... It might... That and Dr. Fontana is very sincere. In his saying he almost agrees with the judge, I part company with him. I think this woman should never be entrusted with a child again. But you know, this goes on all the time. As a matter of fact, there's another case today in which a lady by the name of Wilson, now listen to this. She's a Queen's mother. She abandoned her son a few days after his birth. You know what they did? Listen to this, she and her husband abandoned this baby. And what the court did, or the Bureau of Child Welfare did, was to give her the baby back.
That's sick.
And they said, we'll give you the baby back, but we'll also give you and your husband therapy. Well, I'll tell you how good that therapy was. That baby that they gave her back, little Anthony Wilson, was pronounced dead on arrival at Peninsula General Hospital in Queens. He weighed 11 pounds, less than half the weight of a normal 2-year-old. He was badly beaten. He was burned by hot water. He'd been scalded over a period of time. And the autopsy report said they hadn't seen anyone battered like that in a long time. Now, what I want to know, and this is too much to ask, is where was the common sense in giving Albert and Mary Wilson back their baby when they had abandoned it, when they left it on a doorstep, just left it, a neighbor's doorstep, when he was 7 days old.
You know, that might have been the best thing they could have done. If they knew in their minds that they weren't going to...
Speaking of people who call this program, we thought, in the interest of historic purity, we wondered if any of you in the if either one of you out there can recognize any of these callers who phoned this program during our more salad days. Listen, see if you find your voice on this panoply of montage.
My husband had you pegged right. You go with the wind. I'm so damn aggravated with
Why do I listen to you?
Why do you repeat what I said? You heard me, you creep.
It helps me with my diarrhea, creep.
You come over as an immature, churlish lout. You have no manners, and I can't stand you. Get off the air, creep.
I'll slap the tubes. I'll scratch your face. You will not get away with it.
I'm gonna be waiting there to take the heel of my boot and grind it in that slimy, scummy guts of yours.
Shut up.
Bob?
Yes.
I'm so disappointed in you, Bob. I used to think you were so wonderful. But you turned out to be a real gaboon.
All right. Someday that'll be on the Danny Styles Nostalgia program. Could almost qualify for that right now. Isn't that so? We happened to dig that up, and we thought that maybe, just maybe, one of you would recognize your own voice on there. I don't know what else these are. I don't really know. Well, maybe we'll play another golden oldie a little later. I did just his best book, and I had to shout out loud, hooray for you, Teddy, when he talked about what he considers to be the most dangerous thing facing America today, bilingualism.
Right, but he mentions little ditties along the way of the Great Society, like the Immigration Act of 1965.
Which seems to be in contradiction.
I mean, you know,
Well, you know what Teddy's doing? Here's the way I rationalize that.
What?
Teddy knows that if you tell it like it is, you'll be attacked and smeared as a racist or a bigot or something like that.
He says that in a book.
So, right. So Teddy covered himself, which, you know, an intellect like Teddy, who is a decent guy, but who is also gifted with a keen, penetrating mind and the ability to be very fair. As a historian, he said, hey, you know, this is what can destroy a society more surely from within than anything else, to split their language.
Right.
And then he probably somewhere along the line said, but I don't want to look like I'm being anti-anything in one area.
Right, but the whole tenor of the book gives me the idea of a man, and I really think it's important because I think a lot of Americans are at the point now where they're all reassessing what's happening. And here's a guy who had a guru named JFK, who he admits that he idolized, and his last year, when Teddy made his great speech at the convention, he was forced to go out and demonstrate. You know, he was so carried away by the nostalgia of the 60s and the great things that they did in the 60s, 64. But at the same time, he's struggling with the fact that it all went down the crapper.
I don't know, but speaking of judges, I had a laugh the other day. Really had a laugh, only I wasn't really smiling.
Yeah.
There was this skunk who knifed to death this guy, killed this guy. And he had a long record. It was one of the most incredible records of violent crime going back as long as this guy was alive. He had done everything to everybody. Stabbed this guy, shot that guy, pushed that guy downstairs. I mean, just a vicious individual.
Well, to me,
Now, this guy got sentenced to 20 years to life. And he gets up and he makes a big speech. And finally, Burton Roberts, the judge, tells him to sit down. And then Burton Roberts says, I'm just sorry, I can't give you the penalty you deserve. I want to know, Judge Roberts, what penalty is that? It couldn't be the death penalty because every time I debate you, you're against the death penalty. So please, Justice Roberts, what penalty is it that skunk deserved?
Individuals interested in becoming Fugazy owner-operators must conform to the Fugazy image. The Fugazy owner-operator is immaculately dressed with bow tie and cap. The Fugazy car is spotless. At Fugazy, the customer always comes first. Cab drivers, you probably won't qualify unless, of course, you're willing to change your ways.
What did that got me change my ways? What do I got to do? I got to act like a human being? I got to be a nice guy? Totally extinguished because there are too many people in this country who are really gaining too much power. Don't let an attempt by a current administration bring some sanity back into this. But there are too many people who just don't want anybody else's opinion but theirs.
well, who are you talking about when you talk about these people? I know people.
Well, take take, for starters, a certain organization representing a civil rights group.
Okay.
You say one little thing they don't like, and they want to destroy you. Now, that's not what this country is supposed to be about. This country is supposed to be about a free and open exchange of ideas. I mean, that's what we claim. We claim that the very First Amendment.
I'm more concerned really about people on the other side. You know, we'd be right there in the front, wanting to take the credit for it.
Well, you know, it's true, and you know me pretty well. And, you know the real story about Bob Grant and my background, and you know that I was kidding about the prosecutor thing. But let me tell you this, as far as the Yankees are concerned, I have more fun rooting against them than I do rooting for any team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an anti-fan.
I know that.
And people come in, you know, maybe it's a weekend, somebody will drop in or something, and I'll have the Yankee game, and they say, I thought you hated them. What are you watching them for? I said, why? I'm rooting for the Orioles. Why? I'm rooting for the Red Sox. Why? I'm rooting for whoever they play, I'm rooting for. I despise them and I loathe them. But you know something? I actually feel a little pity for some of the players involved with Steinbrenner. Now, that's ridiculous, feeling sorry for guys that make millions of dollars. But I think George Stein like that, like they're just toy soldiers. I think it's a shame. And the only thing I can say is thanks, George, because you ruined the 1982 season. I really don't think they'll finish that far down. I can't see them finishing below 500. I know they're about 3 games below 4 games. But I can't see them copying the Eastern Division title. I think Milwaukee's going to run away with it eventually. With Baltimore the only possible stopper, I think the Red Sox will start to fade. The whole blame can be placed at this man who is so obsessed with winning. It's really pathetic. One bit. And I tell you, I think he needs Dr. Elise Goldstein. About 5 years on the couch with Dr. Goldstein, and who knows? He might be like all the other owners. Listen, it's a pleasure, pal, and you tell all your buddies out there that discuss Bob Grant and so forth and so on, just keep listening to the program. And when those cavones that hand out those diaries and say, what station do you listen to? Just say WMCA.
Okay, Bob.
Thank you.
Take care. Goodbye.
What's your first name?
Hold on.
What's your name?
Harry.
Harry? You're my pal, Harry.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.
On most issues was correct in the past. You are dead wrong on this and refuse to face the facts. Why won't the Arab countries with all their wealth, robbed from Americans and others, in all their territories, take in their brethren? We took in all of ours. Sorry, Bob, you've lost us as listeners and many others along with us. Signed, a former fan from Elizabeth, New Jersey. P.S. Remember history. When Mexico harassed Texas, President Wilson sent General Pershing into Mexico for 9 months until he rooted out the terrorists. America wasn't playing tiddlywinks then, and Israel isn't playing now. Well, there are many things I could say, but it's not really important to take up too much time with this. I would like to ask the former fan from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and by the way, former fans never write letters. Former fans just forget you. That's it. Period. Zilch. They disappear. Former fans don't take the time to type out a letter, buy a stamp, put it in the mail, and then wait to listen if the guy reads it over the air. But listen, former fan, what do you mean by we took in all of ours? What brethren did you take in? I don't understand. Would you clarify that? You Schlemiel, AAA Pazzola?
Bob, I'd like to talk about the attack on the Supreme Court Justice yesterday.
Yes, on Byron Whizzer White.
Right. Okay. Well, I feel that I'm in total support of what happened yesterday.
You gotta be kidding. Come on.
No, I am. I'll tell you why. I feel that it's a sign that society is fed up and they feel frustrated.
That guy doesn't represent society. That guy's a AAA Cicola.
Oh, well, Bob, there's a lot of
You
frustrating...
gotta be a AAA Sokola to do what that bearded bum did. Come on.
Well, how else do you suggest of making the justices aware of what a lot of people feel?
Well, you stop electing all these stunads that pass legislation or don't vote for the legislation that would really effectively transcend or overcome court decisions. Now, either we believe in the Constitution or we don't. Either we accept what the instrument is or we don't. I accept it. I will abide by it.
It's one thing to accept the Constitution.
And I don't want a rule of a ragamuffin going up there. This crazed individual, afraid of pornography, and even though I'm anti-busing and he said he was anti-bus, I'm not going to go punch out any judge. I mean, there's a couple I'd like to. But why do it to White? White's voting record isn't so bad. See, now I'm contradicting. A real astute listener would say, and then the host, after condemning out of hand the actions of the Utah citizen, then seemed to give an indication that if it was another judge, it would have been all right. You see, I'm analyzing myself. Self-awareness, the key to freedom.
But, Bob, the people have no input on how the justices interpret the Constitution. It's one thing to say you're in favor of the Constitution, but those justices use their political leanings to interpret the Constitution their own way.
Well, look, White voted. He did what he was appointed to do.
The people are seeing the unraveling of the moral fabric of society.
What does that mean? When have we ever had moral fabric? Come on. The unravel. Where'd you read that?
Nowhere. That's...
Taylor Caldwell?
No, that's my own opinion.
You mean you talk that way? Are you married, sir?
No, I'm single.
All right. Do you go out on dates?
Yes.
Okay. Do you say to your girlfriend, you know, I think the moral fiber of our nation is unraveling, darling? Do you talk that way?
Certainly. I was raised in a very conservative household.
No. I mean, I don't mean, I don't mean the substance. I mean the style.
Well, I think that's insignificant. The point is what is important.
You want to know something? You're right. I must grant you, you're right. But what is important is the issue at hand, and I do not believe that the way to solve our problems is to have some goof try to take a poke at a Supreme Court justice.
Do you think they'll have an easy time getting a jury to indict that man? Category say is a Hinckley?
No, I'm not. Although you never know. This year it might be throwing a punch at Whizzer White. Next year the goof might use a BB gun on Thurgood Marshall. In the year after that, a real gun on Brennan. I mean, you never know.
Right. But I think it's a commentary on society, Bob, when people lose their respect for the...
Hey, look, I don't have respect for a lot of things the court has done. I think the Earl Warren Court was a disaster, but I'm not going to go running up on a stage and punch Earl Warren if he were alive.
Well, I can't agree with his methods totally, but I do feel that the members of the Supreme Court have got to come down on their ivory towers and get in touch with the people a little more. And
they should know that.
Okay.
But so I said that. I decried in the course of the discussion, I decried the extent of the operation.
Okay,
That doesn't mean I disapprove of the initial stage. That doesn't mean I disapprove of the goals. If I did, I'd say so. I'm sick and tired of some of these people who want me to bend to their views totally and completely. I'm sick and tired of people who for 12 years said, oh, he's a great guy. He's my favorite Shagets. What a wonderful guy. And then all of a sudden I'm a jerk. All of a sudden overnight I'm a jerk.
Assume that you're an extremely well-informed person.
Well,
the original estimate...
You know, whenever somebody starts buttering me up, I'm always very careful. My guard goes up. So what is it you want to say?
What I want to say is as follows. The original estimates of the people homeless in southern Lebanon that were made homeless who assumedly had homes before the Israeli invasion were 600,000. The amount of civilians that were supposedly killed, according to the original estimates by the International Red Cross, were 10,000. Now, it has been reported by David K. Shipler, who's York Times-based Jerusalem correspondent, that these figures are grossly exaggerated. Now, David Shipler is not known for his pro-Israeli views. Now, in light of that, I think you can draw your own conclusions.
I don't know what that spurious, specious remark means. He's not known for his pro-Israel. I thought he was a reporter. I didn't know reporters were supposed to have biases. Like me, you see, I'm not a reporter.
Fortunately, they do.
I'm not a reporter, pal. I'm a blabbermouth, you see. So I don't have to report anything. I give you my views. And when you come along and you demean a respected journalist like David, who himself is Jewish, by the way, pal.
So is Anthony Lewis, who's a self-hating Jew and an anti...
Well, I'm not talking about... Don't change the subject. Anthony Lewis is a commentator, an analyst, whatever you want to call him. He's an opinionated person. In print,
okay,
he's the same thing I am on the air. So I don't like the fact that because Shipler doesn't conform to what you think he should be writing, you say, well, he's not known for his pro-Israeli views. I don't like also the fact that maybe 5,000 dead Palestinians is acceptable.
There aren't even 1,000 dead, according to what he was saying.
Hey, look, if you want to talk about numbers, I don't even think numbers is important.
Okay, you're right, numbers is important. Any death of any civilians who are not directly involved in the conflict is regrettable. However, I'm sure you could realize that in view of the danger that the PLO posed to Israel, it's just unfortunate that civilians have... First of all, the Israeli army was given direct orders not to shoot.
I know that, and I've gone out of my way to tell anti-Israeli... Don't you understand where I'm coming from? I'm just sick and tired of... Not you, but sick and tired of, like the coward who wrote the letter. How dare that person write that letter? What does that person think I'm going to do? I'd rather... You want to know something?
Yes.
You want to know something? I'm not the most principled person in the world, but I tell you this. I would rather walk out this door and never broadcast again than bend a view just because I thought some people were irate.
I agree with you 100%. All I want to know is exactly what didn't you agree with, or what don't you want to bend over backwards in that person's letter? What specific?
I will not retreat one bit from my condemnation of Menachem Begin.
In that what? What action?
I think the man is totally unpredictable. I think he should have waited till Reagan got back from Europe before he launched the campaign. I said all these things at the time. Who set you up to call me anyway?
No, I see, as a matter of fact, my schedule allows me only to listen to Barry Farber. And it just so happens...
You mean to say you're a midnight person?
Yes, I am.
Uh-huh. Well, all right.
Okay, so
hey, look, I don't mind you call. It's quite the contrary. I welcome your call more than you know.
Well,
all right, that's fine. But look, I welcome your call. You're articulate. You're intelligent, young fellow, and I'm delighted. And I'm not saying that. Even as clear as I try to be, I'm not going to be subject to misinterpretation. But what I'm objecting to is this barrage of mail that I'm getting. It's mainly in the mail. Of these people who turned on me because my views aren't conforming 100% to theirs.
Okay, you have to understand that Jews are very sensitive people. And
well, so am I. Thank you, pal. I'm sensitive, too. Okay? All right, that's it. We're all sensitive. Well, I'm a Pisces. I gotta be careful. Oh, dear. Well, I feel good. You know why I feel good, ladies and gentlemen? Because I'm being myself. And will you, people in the audience, do me a favor, make sure I stay myself. The only time I seem to really get off the track is when I'm not being myself. I am not. I must confess to you, I am not what I tried to be for a while. I am not one of these transplanted disc jockeys. I never was a disc jockey. But I'm not one of these guys that can do the program this way. Well, let's just see if maybe there's somebody out there who has a slightly different opinion, because we do exchange opinions. And we're going to change subjects every 2 minutes, and I'm going to change the subject right now.
Senator Christopher Dodd
gave a lengthy report of his findings firsthand in Israel. And I won't be too long. He said that before Israel invaded, during the time that the PLO in Syria were protecting Lebanon, 100,000 people were killed, 350,000 people were wounded, and I believe he said 500,000 people were left homeless. He said that he personally spoke to the mayor of Tyre, and the mayor knew everyone who was killed, and there were 62 people.
I'm aware of what Senator Dodd said.
Right, now the question I have for you...
Because that isn't the only place that Senator Dodd made his remark.
Okay, the question that I have for you is, did you see any pickup of it by the papers or by the television or radio?
No more than I saw Senator Dodd talking about it. How come Senator Dodd never knew about it?
Well, because he was in Israel just recently. He was in Lebanon just recently.
Well, wait a minute. Something of that magnitude? You mean to say you got to go to Israel to find out? I've been to Israel many times, and I never heard that. Look, we've gone through this many times, and I'm glad that they got cleaned out. I only hope the remaining PLO skunks are destroyed. I don't want to see them. I don't want to see them.
Journalistic even-handedness. That's the only question I'm addressing.
What journalistic even-handedness? From me? I'm not
No,
even-handed.
from you.
I'm not even-handed. I'm not even-handed. Come on.
From the rest of the press. I just wonder if any...
I'm not with the rest of the press. Come on.
I didn't accuse you, Bob.
Oh, okay.
I called before the storm warnings went up. I'm just asking if any of the other press even bothered to report that he said that.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I tell you, the only reason I knew about it is because I read the Jewish Forward.
Well, exactly.
So you know, that's the only reason I knew about it. Right. We still pals, Mort?
We are. I'm going to call you again about the big war, the one that's going on in this country.
Between?
Well, there's the land of the free and the home of the brave. The Scavodes are free to do whatever they want, and we're brave if we try to do anything about it.
Hey, you know what, Mort?
Yep.
You and I are on the same wavelength. God bless you, Mort. We're pals.
Have a good weekend, Bob.
I will, and I love your sense of humor. I love you. That's my pal, Mort. And now we're going to, in just a couple of minutes, those of you who have been living with so-and-so and would love dearly to escape so-and-so, and you wonder, why can't I? We offer you the possibility. Now listen to this. We offer you the possibility of dramatically changing your life. As a matter of fact, about 50,000 Gabons driving home right now, after they hear this program, by the time, if you're in your automobile, you're listening, you're going to hear Howard M. Halpern tell you how to break your addiction to a person. By the time, I could just see it now, by the time you get home to the driveway, wherever it is, you'll say, hey, I don't have to go home. You'll turn right around. Ruin your life, but at least you will have broken the addiction. You think you're wrong. The People's Daily does not want to see the United States and China get together. The People's Daily, because it's a tool of Moscow, and I'm sorry to expose you publicly like this, and I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. You say that you're a decent guy, you mean well, but you're uninformed, pal. Let me tell you, the People's Daily is a mouthpiece for the Soviet Union.
But it's the Chinese Communist Party.
No, it isn't.
No?
No, pal, it isn't. It's put out by Communist Party USA.
Well, it says...
Which Gus Hall has part and parcel, being a stooge of Moscow, part and parcel in Leonid, that swine Brezhnev's pocket. And let me tell you something. It's guys like you, right-wing reactionaries like you, that hurt this country as much as the left.
Why do they...
The only thing the Soviet Union is afraid of is the United States and China getting together.
Well, that's...
And the surest way to cripple our alliance with the Chinese is this obsession for those guys on Taiwan.
So you're saying that the People's Daily is published in Moscow?
It might as well be. They never deviate from the Moscow line, never.
Peeping, I don't know how to pronounce it. Peeping, the People's Daily. Peeping.
Well, then you're not talking about the People's World, pal.
No, People's Daily, I said. The mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party. It's denouncing conservative Americans for pressuring Reagan not to...
Well, I agree with them. I agree with them. How does that grab you? And I don't care if they're communists, fascists, Nazis, Ku Klux Klanners.
Yeah, but
I agree with them because it's done for us to continue this obsession with Taiwan.
Well, I don't understand your reasoning.
I'll tell you why. To sell those guys on Taiwan some of these airplane parts destroys the relationship that Richard Nixon built with China.
Uh-huh. So, in other words, our Soviet...
I don't want to drive 1 billion Chinese back into the arms of Moscow.
Well, you can't change the stripes on a tiger, though, you know. I just wanted to change the subject for a second.
But, you know, I'll tell you something. When I hear John Bircher like you talk like that,
I'm not a member.
It's so frustrating.
I'm not a member of the John Birch Society, but a lot of our opinions...
Oh, you are a member.
I am not. How do you know who's the member? I'm not a member of the John Birch Society. I used to be.
Ah, okay. All right.
I'll be honest with you. I used to be.
All right.
And I still agree with a lot of their ideas, but...
would like to promote the communist cause in this country, and you're doing it with this Uriah Heep approach to the conversation here.
Oh, not at all.
In either case, Charlie, in either case, you represent more danger to this country than Leonid Brezhnev, because you are prepared to be a dupe. You are prepared to play their game at their convenience with the cards they give us.
If you look at the names of the people who are...
Why would Paul Warnke, of all people, Paul Warnke, come out and say that we've got to build up our conventional armaments? Paul Warnke, you know who he is?
Yes.
All right. Now, you ought to like him because he's not with this administration. Digital forces are woefully ill-prepared, woefully undermanned, woefully ill-equipped. Now, who's he concerned with?
He's concerned about the conventional forces.
Yeah, but what country is he concerned with? Is he concerned with Canada, with Mexico?
But you notice he's not talking about MX missiles or neutron bombs. He's talking about conventional.
Well, then what we can do is spend all that money to build up the conventional arms and reinstitute the draft, and you'd be calling, saying which is, I'm going to wind up in a nuclear holocaust. People have been worried about nuclear holocaust. Look, we can't uninvent the bomb. We cannot undo what Einstein and Enrico Fermi and Edmund Teller and Leo Szilard and all the rest did. We cannot disinvent the bomb. It's here.
But we can try to bury it. Did you see today's headline, Bob, in the paper?
Falling spike kills lawyer.
Now, you mentioned draftees, right? Did you see how many so far have refused the draft?
Of course. Why do you suppose I mentioned it?
What?
Because let me tell you something. Look, I'm trying to contain I'm trying to contain myself, but it's very difficult because you upset me greatly. But let me tell you something. I would love to see the look on your face when we go down the drain. And if you think I'm exaggerating, if you think I'm overreacting, I've been saying this for a long time. And our country cannot continue as we are against the Soviet Union because people like you vitiate our strength. People like you, and there are plenty of you, people like you will not allow us to do what we have to do. Therefore, one of two things is going to happen. Either the Soviet Union is going to take us over, or we're going to become a totalitarian state. Thanks to people like you.
That's a generalization, Bob, that you know you can't really defend, but I
don't have to defend it. I'm making a prediction. I'm making this prediction based on where we're going. And I'll tell you this. If one of those Soviet spies were listening to this conversation right now, he would smile and he'd say, hey, this is going better than I thought. He would only hope and pray that there were plenty of guys like you. And while I'm involved in this conversation, there's another guy keeps pointing one finger at the palm of his hand. Because when you come down to it, that's all that counts. Was a spy.
I also wanted to bring out another point about Lebanon. I think, I don't know if you were whiplashed. I just want to bring this point. There was a lot of propaganda. Don't forget the Gaddafi group and the PLO. They're all one great big terrorist outfit. And I think they whiplashed you just a little bit with the propaganda. And correct me if I'm wrong. All of a sudden, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people are being killed. And of course, you or anybody else, including myself, it's horrible to hear. And then on top of all this, you've got some hate mail, right? Now,
a lot of hate mail.
Yeah. Well, you see, the enemy is now trying to whiplash you. Believe it or not, we know that you are a fair individual, a good person. I've been listening to you for I don't know how many years, 20 years. The thing is that pay no attention to the hate mail. You were whiplashed, and just be careful because they really, I think they nearly got you. But I think you backed off, and you're beginning to understand what they did. Okay? Now,
I think
I'm wrong.
Well, the figures which had the New York Times taken in, had me taken in,
sure,
had Time Magazine taken in,
sure,
Newsweek Magazine. I mean, I was in some pretty good company.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what about those? What about the 100,000 or so that were killed in the last 7-8 years? Yeah. None of that came through, right?
You see, they were very shrewd. They gave us these figures, and they calculated correctly. They knew that people like myself in the media would hear about these horrendous figures and say, well, the Israelis must be going wild now.
That's right. That's right.
And Menachem Begin never helped matters any with his bellicose approach.
Well,
let me say this. They couldn't have gotten away with this under Yitzhak Rabin because Rabin's approach is completely different. But with certainly the one known as the Center for International Security has a very nice ring to it. Mr. Joseph Churba, did you found this organization?
Yes, one of several. One of several key individuals who are experts in defense and foreign policy matters.
And what is it that you hope to achieve by appearing on programs like this, by putting out publications and so forth?
To clarify the defense issues in the manner in which they should be treated, that is, the defense and foreign policy questions confronting the United States for the decade ahead. Our interest is in orienting the United States and conditioning public opinion to understand that there is a real threat confronting the United States, and it's the Soviet Union. It is on several dimensions. A very critical one, I think it was expressed very ably during the campaign in 1980. But regrettably, there has been an erosion of the Reagan declaratory policy, and we now have a situation bordering that of the Carter period.
You have said a great deal right here
in the center.
All right, go ahead. Why don't you do
There's
that?
Admiral Zumwalt, former Chief of Naval Operations. There's General Danny Graham, a former Deputy Director of the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency. There's General George Keegan, former Head of Air Force Intelligence. There's Ambassador Kintner. There's Bill Van Cleve, who was the Senior Defense Policy Advisor for Mr. Reagan during the campaign and Head of Transition. And there are others.
Nor, for that matter, without mentioning the Center for International Security by name, the New York Times, in 2 recent editorials, has talked about people who want to perpetuate the worst days of the Cold War and who want to live in this confrontational posture with the Soviet Union. They did name Norman Podhoretz and some other people who are called hardliners, so-called Jacksonian Democrats who did support the president of the 1980 campaign. What do you say to the charge that some people make, New York Times, perhaps the Washington Post, some others, that the hard line is passé?
Their fundamental perception regarding the threat is faulty. The Cold War has not ended. Indeed, it's intensified. It never did end. In fact, it has reached a higher intensity than in the past, if more subtle, behind what I call the misleading abstraction of détente. It is a fact that despite the SALT I and II agreements, the latter which has not been ratified, but negotiated, and the terms under which the United States is accepting and abiding by, There has been no stability in international politics. There's been no correlation between the signature of SALT agreements with the Soviet Union and their aggressive behavior in Africa and the Middle East, in Latin America, and even blackmail in Europe. We see a very serious threat emanating from the Soviets because they have acquired a first strike capability against our land-based ICBM forces. This was the window of vulnerability that Mr. Reagan had proclaimed throughout the campaign, in which he said must be closed in order to establish the security. We intend, and I think this country should, move to close this window of vulnerability and to deny the Soviets a first strike capability against our strategic nuclear forces. If it is not closed, then I submit the United States would be subject to nuclear blackmail. And that is the direction in which our diplomacy is headed.
Do you happen to hear the first person who telephoned this broadcast who talked about some students of his who wake up, as he put it, I'm sure he was exaggerating to say the least, but he said they wake up terrified over a nuclear prospect, and went on to say that his students were upset because the president was making the Soviets nervous, and went on to say that the Europeans, the West Europeans, were making him nervous because they were protesting against the United States. Now, what I'm driving at is this. Why is it that even in this country there are a lot of people who feel that somehow or other we're doing something wrong, that we are precipitating this possible exchange that you're talking about, or that we might even cause the first strike?
We have a tendency to blame ourselves for faulty developments. You know, the United States was extremely patient with the Soviets throughout the 60s and the 70s. In effect, it unilaterally disarmed itself by not keeping pace with the technology and the development of military equipment that it should have otherwise developed in light of the Soviet threat. The Russians, on the other hand, continued to build systematically over the entire period of the 60s and 70s, when we called virtually a unilateral halt on the development of our missiles and technology. I should elaborate more here. See, back in 62, Cuban Missile Crisis, the aftermath of which the Kennedy administration believed, and I think wrongly, as it was turned out later, that since we had overwhelming superiority over the Soviet Union, there was no incentive on their part to negotiate a peace, that we would stand still and allow them to catch up, on the assumption that when they achieved parity, they would negotiate peacefully an arms balance treaty and also behave more responsibly in the third world. Well, neither of the situation evolved. The United States stood still. We did not create the missile systems that we might otherwise have created, while the Soviets forged ahead and acquired gradual qualitative as well as quantitative superiority. At this point, they are ahead of us in all major categories of nuclear power. Their entire industry is oriented for war, something that escapes American public. Why, I don't know, but there's a tendency in the United States to put the blame on ourselves when we cannot negotiate with what is essentially a revisionist power and not a status quo power.
What do you have against George Shultz?
Personally, nothing. He's a very intelligent, capable man and an administrator, and he has done great service to the United States. However, he does represent a repudiation of the Middle Eastern policy declared by Mr. Reagan through the campaign and since then. Mr. Reagan had taken a very strong position on Israel. He argued that it was our sole security asset that we can rely on in that region, and that we must factor it into our security equation against the Soviet Union. Mr. Shultz differs with this because his orientation is principally Arabist and looks upon Israel as an obstacle in the area toward peace. I just putting aside his Bechtel background and his Arabist disposition, the question is one of policy. Are we going to build a framework in this area that ignores the military capability and the potential of the State of Israel at a time when we see Arab power collapsing and Iranian and Soviet power increasing, at a time when we see that our security threats and our real security threat is in the Persian Gulf region? We are subordinating those threats in the service of the so-called Palestinian problem and elevating it as the centerpiece of our diplomacy in the region. I think it is a very dangerous course that this administration is embarking on. The Palestinian issue, however serious it is not the central issue of Middle Eastern politics. The security issues in the Persian Gulf region and the disintegration of the power balance in that area are the most serious issues confronting American diplomacy globally and should be addressed. That has to do with the deployment of American ground power in the region and devising a common strategic arrangement with the State of Israel and with other powers in that area to contain the Soviet threat.
You allude to other powers in that area. What powers would they be?
Turkey.
Turkey.
Cover their sense of balance. I don't believe that the Ayatollah is a madman. I think he's a devout Muslim fundamentalist who rejects Western values, and we should begin to understand him from those premises, not from our premises. From our premises and value system, he is mad. But from his own, he is a very devout Muslim Shiite, as much as is Gaddafi, who also is not mad. The mess in Beirut one way or another in a short period of time, and then probably turn to the West Bank and declare unilateral autonomy. I think that the more the United States and more the Americans speak of self-determination, which the Camp David process does not speak of, the framework does not refer to self-determination or sovereignty for the Palestinians, but that the more we talk about that, the more loose talk about that, the more we create a threat to Jordan, because it is there that the self-determination of the Palestinians who are in exile would be fulfilled. This is known as the Jordanian option. When we talk of autonomy for the Palestinians, we are referring only to the West Bank. When you talk of self-determination, it is going to be in the one area, in the one state that has a majority of Palestinians, and that is Jordan, the state of Jordan, which is part of historic Palestine. And those that talk about self-determination are only undermining the Hashemite monarchy of Jordan.
I've been on the West Bank.
Internal inconsistency. It's inherent, incompatible. His talk about this containing the Soviet threat and his posture in the Middle East is fundamentally incompatible with each other. I fault Mr. Weinberger for his amateurish credentials. None of us in the Reagan advisory team during the campaign and through transition ever anticipated the appointment of Mr. Weinberger as Secretary of Defense. He had no credentials in that regard. And his behavior since has shown it. He has failed to close the window of vulnerability. We don't know how he wants to deploy the MX missile. We don't know how we're going to develop the rapid deployment force. We still are not sure that we're capable of even deploying a modest amount of force in the Middle East to deter the Soviets. And the one policy in which we know that he's very strong on is the containment of Israeli power, which we think is fundamentally incompatible with his overall rhetoric, not policy. I could speak on behalf of my colleagues when I say that unless and until we learn how to talk with the Israelis and to harness their power and their potential military power in the service of Western interests and the United States, we, the United States, would have no effective policy in that region. That would be wrong. The Israelis have their own interests. They would not act as a surrogate army. There's a confluence of strategic interests between Israel and the United States. And they would act in any case, whether the United States was with them or not, in what happens in Lebanon, and what happens in Jordan, what happens in Syria, as they are indeed today. This has to be understood, that they are the preeminent military power within the region. You cannot stabilize that region any more without Israel than you can stabilize Western Europe without Germany or the Far East without Japan. its power in that area is very strong, and it's getting stronger. The qualitative gap is widening within Israel and the Arab states. This is demonstrated in the revelation of their new military technology, which they demonstrate in taking out the SAM systems, the T-72 tanks, and in their air-to-air combats where they knocked down 102 Soviet-built MiGs against none. They have a technology that is beyond even the United States, and they will act in their need, according to their need and capability within that region in their own defense. We must recognize that to stabilize that area, we have to create a strategic dialogue with them and discuss common regional objectives and global objectives in the containment of Soviet power, which also is a threat to Arab sovereignty as well. But this we have failed to do, and I think a large part of the blame should be on Weinberger's shoulders. So his talk about containing the Soviet Union and at the same time confronting Israeli power is incompatible and, in my judgment, injurious to the American strategic interest.
What about
the objective is deterrence.
Yes.
Without that deterrence, unless we have a credible second strike capability, no, I'm not talking superiority, credible second strike capability, we will have no credible foreign policy. That is the bedrock of it all. To the American opposition, I think neither should be sold, not the pipeline nor the grain. In fact, I would go a step further and deny the Soviet Union the corn, which it gets only from the United States, which is the basis of its meat consumption. I would deny them the meat. I'd put them on a starch diet. That took the form of the dismissal, not the resignation, of Mr. Haig. The White House has yet to get its act together. It has no overall framework with which to conduct its foreign policy. It has yet to develop a security framework for the Defense Department. It has yet to develop a weapons acquisition policy. It has yet to devise a regional security framework in the Middle East. Their argument is justified. He's very bellicose and rhetorical, but the policy is very soft. And that is the surprise about Mr. Reagan. We have Reagan without Reaganism, because in my judgment, he has been co-opted by his own bureaucracy. He did not put conservative-oriented defense specialists and foreign policy affairs people in the key slots that direct the ship of state. That is why we have the disarray.
Begin. I was ensconced in some badinage with some people in the executive offices of WMCA just a little prior to airtime. We were talking about a forthcoming program on the 27th of August. We will emanate from a nudist camp, and we were trying to make arrangements for the technical procedures. Someone came skipping into the office and said, "Did you hear they bombed Arafat's office?" And I checked our news wires, and I have no information other than there was a report that a bomb did hit in Arafat's office. I have no word whether he was hurt, injured, or otherwise. I don't think it would do any good to make a martyr out of the crumb. But if we have any information on Yasser, we'll pass it along to you. I had wanted to read a particularly touching letter. I tell you, I got to get myself organized. I sit around and I say, I want to do this, and I want to read that, and I want to do this, and then I get distracted. Next thing you know, come airtime, I don't know where I am. I hope they're not taping this and sending it out to the West Coast.
Are named each and every...
What do you do with your life?
I'm a secretary.
I see. Do you date?
Of course.
I see. You have a social life?
Of course, Bob.
Uh-huh. I'm not putting you down. I just wonder why a young woman would go on and on and on about MIRVs, warheads, nuclear strike forces, obsolescent bombers, B-70 programs, and the like.
You're right. Most of my friends keep talking all...
You must be the hit of the party. I could just see when they're making up guest lists. They say, oh, we've got to have Katherine of Babylon. She'll talk about the B-70.
No, I'm afraid the problem is everybody has their heads in the sand.
I see. You don't bore your friends, do you?
I hope not. They seem to like me very much.
Uh-huh.
Well, you know, Bob...
Any of them wear Walkman when they see you?
No. You know, Bob...
This may seem incongruous to some people. They may say, hey, what is that hypocrite doing there? He is asking for people to talk about what's on their mind as somebody calls and talks, and he's making fun of her. But I'm not really making fun of you. I just find it inconceivable that you would be so steeped in this and be so serious about this as though you really intend to proselytize for your program.
Well, you know what the problem is, Bob? Instead of keeping my nose in the television and watching the stupid moronic and Mindy and television shows like that, I do a great deal of reading. You see, I would like to marry and have children someday, but I don't want them to grow up under the Russian regime.
I see.
That seems strange to pseudo-conservative and pseudo-Americans like yourself. But,
I'm being put down. I'm getting it now.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to...
I don't know why the label, but that's all right, dear.
Well, you ask people to call and talk about different things, and I'm telling you from my own experience, most of
your own experience in what area?
Extremely limited, talking to friends, reading the papers, listening to people who call in and talk to you, listening to other talk shows, and yes, I do confess, I listen to other talk shows. And most Americans are unaware of the fact that America itself is in grave danger, and all they hear is the Fund for Peace and programs like that, and Philip Stern. They can pick up the paper and read the New York Times, which says we should not spend any more money on missile programs when there's, quote, people starving, unquote, in America. The American people are fed that diet. So now and again, when there's a few of us stand up, you see, you're the one who says your influence counts, use it. And when some of us stand up and stick our necks out, people like you shoot them off.
Oh, no, I'm not shooting it down. No, you misread me. I mean, essentially, I agree with you, and I think organizations like the Fund for Peace are dangerous. I really do. I hear the propaganda every day as I'm driving in, and I just cringe because I wonder how many meatheads are out there who are really going to believe this.
See, the problem is...
But on the other hand, I still wonder about a 30-year-old woman who I haven't seen your photo, but I don't know. I wonder what there is about you that makes this so important.
Well, a few of us do love this country. A few of us have traveled abroad. And when in our youth we were told that we have to find out where it's at, we learned through different sources that America is where it's at, which is why we have the world's worst illegal alien problem.
Do you really, I don't mean to cut you here, but do you really think there'll be a war?
With the deuterium fission type of materials that the Soviet Union has been experimenting with for a long time, as Dr. Teller himself points out, nuclear war does become feasible.
I didn't ask you about a nuclear war. I said, do you think there's going to be a war?
Yes, and it will be a nuclear one.
Oh, well, then there won't be a war, then. If it's nuclear, it won't be a war.
Well, it depends.
It'll be the end of the world. There's no such thing as a nuclear war.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Anybody who really thinks that anybody could survive a nuclear war is not playing with a full deck.
Ask Dr. Edward Teller, then, the father of the hydrogen bomb, because that's where I got my information from. I am no nuclear...
Well, Dr. Teller is too intelligent a man to really think anybody could survive a nuclear war.
He's not talking about a, quote, conventional nuclear war in that sense of the word. He is talking about a new change in atomic physics. It is called deuterium fission. The radioactivity decays in a maximum of 6 months, not 5,000 years.
So then all we have to do is stay in our little cubbyhole for 6 months, then we come out and everything's fine. I see. And the Soviets are going to make sure that they drop bombs that will lose their radioactivity within 6 months. I could just see them now. We don't want this fallout to go beyond the 6-month period. We want it to mature like a CD at the bank.
Are you aware of the reversal of the polarities?
May I ask you how your sex life is?
Mine is very good, but I'm afraid I'm going to have an awful lot of problems with you. I'm sorry, Bob.
Why don't we go out together and see if I could get your mind off of B-70s for a night?
Well, Bob, when it happens, I'm very sorry. I'll say a prayer for you because apparently you need it. Good afternoon, Bob.
Well, Catherine, hold it. Will you call me again?
Probably not.
Ah, gee. Oh. Well, I had a choice. I could have either indulged her or told you what responses she evoked in me. And again, I made a mistake. I should have been phony and said, ha, that's nice. But I don't know, it just... Well, you tell me, is it normal for someone like that to be that steeped in the intricacies of a B-70 bomber versus a B-52, talk about MIRV warheads, first strike capability, and all that she said? You tell me. One thing I'll say for her, she called. She called. The news reporters and, well, anyway, don't get me started. I'll get in trouble. Go ahead.
The point is this. I'm completely fed up with these starry-eyed anti-nukers. I listened to some of the speeches given at the big demonstration in Central Park a few weeks ago, and not one single speech mentioned the word Russia.
No.
America was the big villain, and it needs unilateral disarmament. The truth is that it's doubtful if we could ever build up our defenses to what they should be. Period. But these freaked out latter-day hippies are hammering the last nails into the coffin. It's obviously a sick society we live in because a person can't even admit that he's a patriot in this society, and that's what we need right now. Is a counter-demonstration of 4 million real-life Americans, and once and for all put this country on the right track again.
Well, as Vladimir Grabnelkov said in 1958, and he was in the government of Nikita Khrushchev. He said, disarmament drives and anti-war movements worldwide can only serve to aid the Soviet Union in its struggle against the imperialist world. Because it is only in the imperialist nations that these efforts will be manifested. It is only in these nations that people who are driven to the point of fright will help to paralyze the efforts of their fascist governments.
And they're very smart. They let the Swedish or the Scandinavians in to Russia to make a demonstration, but they made sure before they let them out there.
Very cleverly, very tightly controlled, and very orchestrated demonstration in Moscow, right?
Yes.
The phrase that the TV networks used was, for the first time ever, a demonstration in Moscow, etc., etc. That phrase, for the first time ever, led people to really believe it was a spontaneous, free demonstration, which, of course, it was not.
The Russians were having the time of their life listening to that.
Yeah. Because after having dinner one night last week, while walking in what's described by some Pollyannas as the greatest city in the world, two mutants accosted him, hit him on the head, knocked him to the floor, to the sidewalk, and rifled his pockets. This man was taken to Roosevelt Hospital. He was given some stitches. And thank the good Lord, he'll be all right physically. But he's not the youngest guy in this business. And at any age, it's a traumatic experience to have two thugs come out of nowhere, hit you on the head, take your money. But it just serves as further proof that we have been losing the battle against crime, and we've got to get really tough. Now, I want you to understand something, ladies and gentlemen. The police department of the city of New York could not go out tomorrow and arrest every perpetrator there is. No, I'm not saying that. But they can tell you, once they do make a collar, that the guy they have has been pinched many times before, and for one reason or another is on the loose. Understand what I'm saying? I want to tell you, can I alert you? Can I sound the clarion call? Can I tell you are those out there. There are those amongst us in every city in the land who have served notice on us that they are going to rip us off every chance they get. They have served notice that our lives mean nothing to them. They have served notice on us that they are predators, not fellow citizens to live in harmony, but predators whose every moment is dedicated to beating us, to robbing us, to raping us, and even more than that. Unlike the criminal of a generation ago, who usually only was killed if he resisted, these mutants, these beasts, these marauders, these brigands take our lives usually just to add to their pleasure. They are sadistic, they are vicious, they've declared war on us, and so far we haven't really been fighting back. Now I know I've said essentially this before. What I'm saying is not new. What amazes me is that after saying it for 12 years, so little has really been done. And enacting any death penalty is meaningless. In and of itself, it's meaningless. If we don't come to grips with crime for what it is, as an entity, which is faceless, raceless, religionless, and deal with the crime as it has existed, and as it exists today, and as it grows today. If we don't deal with that, then things will come to such a sorry state that within time, perhaps 18 years, perhaps it'll be the year 2000, if you want to romanticize, dramatize, then we will either A, be an anarchical state, or B, in trepidation, in frustration, in anger, we will become a fascist state. But it's absurd. It defies logic. It flies in the face of common sense to think that we could go on the way we have been without something happening.